Throughout the 80s, the urban centres of the UK seemed to foster independent music that had a fascination with electronics and hard-edged experimentalism. But in the Shire counties outside of London, connections to the 60s psychedelic underground were alive and tripping. This is cassette culture. In this episode, we feature two people who built combinations of fanzines, music distribution and performance from two different directions. I'm Martin Franklin. In this episode, I spoke to Richard Allen, editor of psychedelic magazine Freakbeat and founder of Delerium Records, and Michael Dog of Club Dog, Megadog and founder of Planet Dog Records. We'll hear more about Michael's own story later, but I started by asking him if he remembers crossing paths with Richard.
He was brilliant. I mean, you know, he worked so hard to promote the scene and the music that he was involved with. You know, he really is a pioneer within the, what you might call old school psychedelic scene.
I did the odd bit for Record Collector and Mojo. Yeah, and I wrote for a magazine called Encyclopedia Psychedelica. They didn't really have a lot of music in it, but I did write for them. It was a sort of a literary digest of sort of countercultural stuff in the 80s. Fraser Clark, yeah. So before Freakbeat, I got to know, well, about the time I got involved with Freakbeat, I got to know Fraser, and I would regularly go round his flat in Hampstead. But I used to love just talking to Fraser because he was just such a character and had met so many strange people. You know.
So obviously that led you into contributing some writing for the magazine.
I wrote for it, yeah. I mean, I even had one, I spoke to Timothy Leary on the phone. I tried to interview him.
Wow.
Fraser had his number and he knew him, and I wanted to do an interview with Timothy Leary about his records because no one had ever written a piece about the records. And he made an album in the early 70s with Hendrix played on. He worked with Ashra Temple as well on an album called 7 Up. But I was really disappointed because when I got through to him, he was nice enough, and he just was going, I only want to talk about what I'm doing now. I don't want to talk about the past, you know, which was kind of annoying because no one ever did interview him about his records. Sadly, he's not here to interview anymore.
Free energy. Structure. Release. Control. Turn on. Turn off.
What do you turn on when you turn
the oscillating rhythm of turn on, turn off, expansion, contraction, turn on.
Yeah, well, I think for a while it was, you know, as much as anything was the kind of Bible of that scene. But in terms of music, I can't think of any other magazine that had a patch on Freakbeat.
I started contributing, and then one of the editors, Hugh Deller, couldn't do it anymore, and Ivor asked me whether I wanted to become an editor. And that was in 1987. It worked really well because Ivor's taste was different from mine. So Ivor's was much more into the hardcore garage. He liked the Cramps. He really liked, the more sort of punk side of things. My taste was more leaning towards probably prog rock, space rock, that sort of thing. So between us, we covered quite a broad range of what was going on, and we became a magnet. People sent us stuff. So there are people I'm still in contact with now. It's an Italian band called No Strange who made some great records in a sort of early Pink Floyd style. We covered them. We covered the Flaming Lips before anyone had heard of them. Ivor did an interview with them. He absolutely loved the Flaming Lips. We did an interview with Terence McKenna. We tried to get a bit more like Oz Magazine by going off road and starting to interview sort of interesting characters. Terence McKenna was an interesting guy.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Key ingredient in in active shamanism is psychedelic plants, psychedelic experiences. And in a way, that closed the loop between the impulse toward the archaic and the impulses of modern science and modern medicine. The key is the psychedelic experience. That's what makes the shaman a shaman.
Freakbeat, of course, has a particularly extreme and distinctive design to it.
Yeah.
How did that come about? So I guess just for explanation to listeners, it would have things like some kind of psychedelic patterns printed in red with blue text over the top, so that the only way you could really read it easily was in 3D with 3D glasses.
Yeah, and we had complaints actually from older people who couldn't read it at all, and people who were colourblind. But
okay,
we used to advertise for artists, and we got bombarded with artists, some of whom still work today. Dale Simpson gave us a load, and he's done, if you look him up, he does loads of album covers. Dan Abbott was the big one. His artwork is incredible. He did Freakbeat 5 with the Paddington cover. Dan ended up being Storm Thorgerson's personal assistant of hypnosis in the last 10 years of Storm's life, and still works in Germany and took over Storm Studios effectively after. And he used to do all of Storm's sketches, but his artwork's amazing. Mm-hmm. We had more than we would ever need. I think I've still got some here now. And we would go through all the artwork and we would pick things out that we thought worked and we'd use it.
Right.
And some artists like Dale and Dan, we'd commission things. We also had Pete Loveday did some stuff for us. So it was, it wasn't a commercial project in any way, shape or form. When I look back at it, it was quite mad, really, Mm. But it was what I was into, what Ivor was into, and what the whole scene was into, really. When I first got involved, it was a very small magazine. It was well printed, but my father was a printer, and he helped me get it to the point where we could print that.
So you quite early on, you printed it kind of commercially just for the quality?
Yeah, it was a printer who had a press in his own garage. What happened was digital printing killed traditional printing. And of course, it was a very technical thing with big, huge presses, with mechanical machines. And as those printing plants got replaced with digital, quite a lot of the machines were given to the printers to do with what they wanted if they could take it away. So they would run a business themselves, printing things for people. Well, the printer said to me, I don't agree with some of the things you say in your magazine, but I think it's an amazing thing. So he was the one that kind of connected us to that world where we could get our vision turned into a reality. But the problem is it got so out of hand with like multiple flexi discs, loads of 3D glasses. It took so long to put together that our ambition sort of ran ahead of us, and we had more tracks of the flexi discs than we could possibly ever release in the magazine. So I said to Ivor, why don't we do an LP? And that was the first release, Psychedelic Sauna, which was stuff that we liked that we just never would be able to put on the flexi discs, and that immediately sold really well. I mean, we were really surprised, and that had the first Ozrics vinyl release on it, Riff, which is on that record, and a whole bunch of other bands. So from then it mushroomed and turned into a label. It was literally a hobby that got out of control, yeah. I mean, I had to give up my day job in order to carry on doing it because I just didn't have any time to go to work eventually. And we're doing the mail order as well. And the mail order funded the label, and the label funded the mail order. And that symbiotic relationship carried on for the life of the label. Basically, Freakbeat magazine, I started the Freak Emporium mail order because we started getting letters saying, "Oh, your magazine's great. I really like this. This album sounds incredible. Where do I get it?" And we get that all the time. So I thought, I'll buy a bunch of these records and put a mail order catalogue in Freakbeat. They flew out. I mean, I couldn't keep up. And it just grew and grew and grew.
The invention of the 4-track cassette recorder was having its impact among bands and resulted in a boom of independent self-distributed cassette releases by the likes of Webcore, Ring, Porcupine Tree and others. Among these, festival favourites Ozric Tentacles grew a huge network by enthusiastically getting their first cassette album, Erp Songs, to audiences through every alternative outlet they could find.
I think what changed everything was the invention of the Porter Studio. You know, the little...
I do.
People had those and they started making music in their bedrooms and they started releasing it on cassette. And I distinctly remember the moment I first came across Ozric Tentacles. I couldn't believe it. And so I sent off for a copy of this tape. And, you know, more and more of these sorts of tapes would appear over the next few years. Particularly, you'd see them on Sunday. If you remember the guys that used to sell bootlegs at Camden. Yeah, most record stores would have a sort of tray of tapes with photocopied inserts. You started seeing these tapes, like Ozric Tentacles, Webcore, on sale with these sort of bootleg tapes. So there became a whole distribution network for bands that didn't have record deals. Ozrics are the best example because they must have sold ridiculous amounts of those. Everybody I know had them, and you only had an original one if it had a rainbow label because then people started to bootleg the tapes. So the ones I've got, some of the ones that the band did, and they had like a rainbow dyed label. But people made copies, so a lot of people have only got copies of those tapes. The reason this worked is because the mainstream wasn't providing what people wanted. And we were selling Ozric tapes, but so Club Dog had a mail order business selling Ozric tapes, and it was just literally word of mouth.
Aligning with their own interpretation of the 80s entrepreneurial spirit, Ozric's leader Ed Wynn found a London audience for their performances at Club Dog and its fledgling cassette distribution business run by Michael.
We almost certainly got to know of them via their first tape, Erp Songs. When I started Woof Distribution, I just asked him, we were quite good friends by then. And I just asked him if he'd be willing to give me a kind of master tape of each one and whether I could just reproduce them and I would pay him a royalty on them, which I did. But he just gave me a master of each of the albums and I had them duplicated commercially and would faithfully reproduce the photocopied covers on the right coloured papers and that. And so I suppose if there's ever a collector's market for these things, there'll be a Woof Distribution version of each of those that people will come across, that you'd only know it because the cassette body label would say Woof Distribution on it. I produced a few cassette albums myself of live at Club Dog cassettes.
Did you? I didn't know that.
Yeah, there's a handful of them. I had a period of about a year or year and a half where I recorded, or I used to look after the main room at Club Dog. If you remember, there were 2 stages at Club Dog, a larger one and a smaller room, and I ran the main room. So I had a pair of microphones permanently set up in there, and as part of our rig every week, I would wire them into a cassette recorder and record an SA90 of the bands who played. So a handful of those I then released as live at Club Dog recordings.
Wow, do you remember who was on them?
The ones that come to mind were there was a Nodens Ictus one, the Ozric Tentacles offshoot, their sort of ambient chill out offshoot. The best one was actually a band called the Rhythmites, who were a really excellent reggae band from the West Country. Cassette platform proved that there was a market for this stuff, and so it enabled us to set up the label, which became Planet Dog Records, sign Eat Static, and of course their first album, Abduction, just took off right from the start. You know, ready-made market for it. It sold and sold and sold, and still is the best seller of the catalogue even now. Still sells and sells.
Jugglers, night shows and the like has taken them from the pokey hole of London's George Robey Club to sell out nationwide tours. The guest list Lucy Frears went down to the New Year Megadog extravaganza to sample the atmosphere, find out whether 8 out of 10 clubbers really do prefer pedigree techno, and talk to the aptly named Bob and Michael Dog.
Try and program a night so that it takes a member of the audience on a journey from start to finish, a musical and visual journey. They'll meet interesting people, see interesting things, and go back to whatever their life is with a more positive spirit.
Everyone loves each other. It's the best visuals, most amazing music. It's totally what I'm into. The festivals and the ravers have all got together.
It's really pumping and the atmosphere's really cool. From running the odd party in North London nearly 10 years ago, it developed into the weekly Club Dog in Finsbury Park, grew into the larger monthly Megadog in London's The Rocket, and then this summer, all the people who never made it to London had the chance to dance non-stop as the sellout MIDI circus travelled the country with fire eaters and acrobats in tow. With a monthly night now at the Manchester Academy and other dates nationwide, the dogs don't look ready to lie down. And it all started with 2 of the self-described most untrendy people in the music business, Michael and Bob Dog. Already, Megadog's most regular outfits have come together for a compilation album on the new Planet Dog label, which grew out of their mail order service. The compilation features bands such as Banco de Gaia, Eat Static and System 7, and the title, and indeed the message, is Feed Your Head.
Lucy Frears reporting. Club Dog reopens on January the 14th with the first Megadog on the 28th. They'll be playing Manchester and other dates around the country in February, so check the local press for details.
BBC Radio 1, covering the 1994 Megadog event as a highlight of the new year. Their format of live electronic performance events was an expensive production to tour. By the start of the new decade, Megadog had run its last event. With Planet Dog Records distributor Ultimate having gone under in 1999, taking the rights and the sales income with them, music business was proving tough.
We sold a lot of albums. We sold about 500,000 albums over the 7 years that Planet Dog ran. Worldwide, we sold about 500,000 albums, but none of us got the money for 500,000 albums. I think we did create both a live and recorded music platform that was a hub for lots of people who were doing stuff.
With the competing priorities of running a booming fanzine, distribution service and label, Delerium Records also found the competitive practices of the music business hard to deal with.
The Freak Emporium went online earlier than Amazon, thanks to Ivor. Ivor put us online. I mean, it was very basic, the original. I remember at the time thinking this will never catch on when Ivor first suggested it, but credit to him, it did. But it didn't catch on in the way it originally was, where you literally had to email an order to somebody. But because of that and my background, I know a lot about online retail. I got sucked into all of this tax stuff. Delerium had to shut due to an abuse of the tax system, which I then shut down. So I just got involved in all of that side of things. But I still dabble in music. But it sort of... It was born, lived and died, Delerium. So,
and by that time, were you just like happy to let it go?
Well, I sort of went to the funeral and moved on. Do you know what I mean? It's like, that's how it felt. Because, of course, you're always attached to something, you know. But you can't go on forever. It just becomes tired. No label, if you look, lasts forever. Freakbeat never really sold huge quantities. I think we made 2,000 or 3,000 of each copy, the later ones. The first three is only like 500 of each, and they're really rare. Interestingly, I had a call out of the blue from the British Library wanting me to provide them with copies for their fanzine archive, which I did. So they're sitting in the British Library. I look back on those times with fondness because I've kept all my cassettes, and there were so many bands that didn't make records in that scene. I think people still like physical objects, and I think that there's a lot of things that will never be recorded because they'll be lost because they only exist as a digital thing. So a lot of culture is now going to be lost because it's not being preserved.
Yeah, so when the servers go off, that's it, our history disappears. Yeah, that's a very scary moment to approach, isn't it? Still. I'm glad people will be able to go to the British Library and scan through Freakbeat Edition 3.
Well, funny story. Freakbeat kind of fizzled out because we just didn't have the time to do it. I had an email out of the blue from a guy that said he was a customer of ours. And I quite often get customers contacting me saying, I remember you, we used to buy from you. And this guy said, I've got a friend who just found 4 books. He works for Oxfam and they are something to do with your website. I think you'd be interested in looking at them. Anyway, I contacted the guy, and it was the buyer, the guy that dealt with books at Oxfam in the UK, and he had 3 bound volumes of the Delerium website. They're specially bound. I got no idea who did them. They were given into an Oxfam shop, and somehow they'd got back to me, and somebody had printed off our website and bound it. And I've now got that, and it found its way to me, which is just too weird to even think about.
Suicide is legal, but it's not
this episode, you heard the voices of Michael Dog and Richard Allen. Music was Operation Apricot by Ring from their self-released cassette, Oh De Dun Dun. What Do You Turn On When You Turn On by Timothy Leary from You Can Be Anyone This Time Around. And tracks from the Psychedelic Sauna LP on Delerium were Black Ferris Wheel by The Coloured Plank, Mind Train Jam by Sundial, Riff 83 by Ozric Tentacles, Nothing Can Stop Us Now by Webcore from their cassette The Great Unfolding, Live at Club Dog by Nodens Ictus from Woof Distribution, Medicine Wheel by Eat Static from their Prepare Your Spirit cassette, and Nightmare by Treatment from the Psychedelic Sauna on Delerium Records. This episode brings Season 1 of the Cassette Culture podcast to a close. Season 2 is already in production, so we'll be back after a short break.